3 weeks had passed since the last human ship disappeared into deep space, and Chancellor Vex Tar of the Hegemony Council was already calling emergency meetings every day. The first real crisis had hit the galaxy, and nobody knew how to handle it without human help. The Outer Rim territories were burning with conflict, and the Assembly was falling apart. Trying to solve it, Representative Dal Su was one of only 5 humans who had volunteered to stay behind for a few more months to help with the transition. He sat in the observer gallery watching the alien delegates argue in circles below. The massive chamber, that had once echoed with productive debate, now rang with angry voices and confused shouting. The problem seemed simple enough. On the surface, 3 member species were fighting over mining rights in the Kepler sector. The Thrakari claimed they had discovered the mineral-rich asteroids first. The Yilnari said the territory belonged to them by ancient treaty. The insectoid, Ket, demanded compensation for damages and threatened to attack both sides if they did not get paid. In the old days, this would have been solved in hours. A human mediator would have studied the claims, found a creative solution that satisfied everyone, and prevented any violence. But now there were no human mediators left. Only alien bureaucrats who followed rigid rules and could not think outside their own species. Logic, Dal Su watched as the Thrakari delegate, a massive creature covered in thick scales, stood up and roared his anger. The translator system struggled to convert his words, but the meaning was clear. He was accusing the Yilnari of lying about their ancient claims. The Yilnari delegate, a tall, thin being with multiple arms, waved frantically and spoke in rapid clicks that meant she was deeply offended. The Ket representative did not bother to speak at all. The insect-like creature simply projected holographic images of destroyed Ket mining equipment and dead Ket workers. The message was obvious. Pay us or we will make you pay, Chancellor. Vextar tried to maintain order, but his species, the crystalline Vorthon, had always relied on human help to understand emotional conflicts. His people were logical and mathematical, but they could not grasp the passionate disputes that drove other races to war. We must follow proper procedure, Vextar announced in his crystal-clear voice. All claims will be reviewed by the appropriate committees. Decisions will be made according to established protocols. There will be no exceptions to assembly law. The Thrakari delegate laughed bitterly. Your procedures take months, he growled. Our people are dying while you shuffle papers. The humans would have fixed this already. But you drove them away with your arrogance. This comment caused an uproar in the chamber. Several species began shouting at once. Some blamed the humans for abandoning their responsibilities. Others blamed the assembly leadership for letting the humans leave. A few delegates walked out in frustration, saying they would not waste time on pointless arguments. Dal Su sent an encrypted message to the human fleet using a secure communication channel that the aliens did not know about. He typed quickly. The situation is getting worse every day. The assembly protocols that worked when humans were here to interpret and adapt them are now causing more problems than they solve. Nobody knows how to compromise anymore. The truth was that humans had always been the invisible glue holding the galaxy together. They could see problems from multiple perspectives at once. They understood that different species had different needs and different ways of thinking. Most importantly, they knew that sometimes the rules had to be bent to prevent bigger disasters. The alien species had never learned these skills because they never had to. When problems arose, they simply called for human help, and humans solved everything. Now they were discovering that their own diplomatic systems were inflexible and ineffective without human guidance. Ginny, another human observer, was monitoring the military situation from the security center. She watched as patrol ships from all 3 species began gathering near the disputed territory. Each side was bringing more weapons and more soldiers. The potential for violence was growing every hour. She sent her own message to the fleet. Military escalation is happening faster than anyone expected. The Assembly peacekeeping force is paralyzed because they don't know how to deploy without human strategic planning. The local commanders are requesting permission to intervene, but nobody in command knows what orders to give. The Assembly peacekeeping force had always been led by human admirals and generals. Not because humans were the best fighters, but because they were the best at understanding complex political situations and finding ways to stop conflicts before they started. Now the peacekeeping force was like a sword without someone to wield it. By the end of the first month, the Outer Rim conflict had spread to 5 different star systems. Trade ships were being attacked by raiders who took advantage of the chaos. Civilian colonies were evacuating as military fleets moved through their space. The 3 original species in the dispute had been joined by their allies, and the situation was becoming a regional war. The Assembly tried everything they could think of. They formed committees to study the problem. They sent diplomatic missions to all sides. They offered economic incentives for peace. But nothing worked because they could not understand the deeper cultural and emotional issues that drove the conflict. The Thrakari were not really fighting about mining rights. They were fighting to prove their strength and honor to their ancestors. The Yilnari were not really concerned about ancient treaties. They were afraid that losing this territory would make them look weak to their enemies. The Ket did not actually want money. They wanted revenge for their dead workers. These were the kinds of insights that human mediators would have understood immediately. But the alien diplomats could only see the surface issues. They tried to solve the wrong problems with the wrong solutions and made everything worse. Tae Yang, a human engineer who was maintaining critical systems on the assembly station, received dozens of requests for help every day. Alien species wanted him to solve technical problems that their own engineers could not handle, but his orders were clear. He was only there to keep essential life support and navigation working. He was forbidden from helping with any other projects. The requests were getting more desperate every week. The Malari needed help with their underwater cities, which were failing without human-designed filtration systems. The Zelani wanted assistance with their quantum computers, which kept crashing without human programming. The Vorthon could not figure out how to repair their crystal technology without human understanding of harmonic frequencies. Each request that Tai Yang had to refuse made the situation worse. The alien species were realizing that they had become completely dependent on human knowledge and skills. They had stopped learning how to solve their own problems because humans always did it for them. Min Ho, who worked on the communication systems, overheard a secret meeting between assembly leaders. They were discussing whether to send a formal delegation to human space to beg for their return, but their pride would not let them admit they had made a mistake. Instead, they talked about offering humans limited consulting contracts and temporary advisory positions. The fear in their voices was obvious. They knew the galaxy was falling apart, and they knew it was their fault for taking human help for granted. But they still could not bring themselves to offer humans the respect and equality they deserved. As the second month ended, the Outer Rim War had claimed thousands of lives and destroyed dozens of colonies. The Assembly was facing its first member withdrawals, as smaller species decided they were safer on their own than as part of a galactic government that could not protect them. Dalsu prepared his final report to send to the human fleet. The message was simple but devastating. The galaxy is learning what it means to live without human problem-solving abilities. The lessons are being written in blood and fire, and they are only just beginning. The silence that humanity left behind was no longer quiet. It was filled with the sounds of breaking alliances, failed negotiations, and growing conflicts. The aliens were discovering that the peace they had enjoyed for 2 centuries had not been natural or inevitable. It had been carefully maintained by a species they had barely noticed until it was gone. The cracks that appeared in the first weeks after humanity's departure were becoming chasms that threatened to swallow entire civilizations, and still the alien leaders were too proud to admit they needed the humans back. 6 months after humanity had vanished from galactic space, the Galactic Assembly was drowning in chaos. Commander Tae Yang walked through the corridors of the massive space station that had once been the shining symbol of galactic unity. Now it felt like a tomb filled with the echoes of desperate voices and failing systems. 12 active wars burned across the galaxy. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries were now battlegrounds where merchant ships traveled in armed convoys, if they traveled at all. The elegant diplomatic protocols that had prevented conflicts for 200 years had collapsed without human wisdom to guide them. Tae Yang stopped at his workstation in the engineering section, where warning lights flashed, read across dozens of monitoring screens. The station itself was falling apart, not from any attack or sabotage but from simple neglect and misunderstanding. The alien engineers who had taken over human responsibilities did not understand how the complex systems worked together. Every day brought new requests for help that Tai Yang had to refuse. A Malari delegation had begged him to explain why their water recycling systems were failing. A group of Vorthon scientists wanted him to show them how to repair their quantum computation arrays. The Ket military leaders demanded that he fix their weapons targeting systems that had stopped working properly, but his orders were absolute. He was only allowed to maintain the essential life, support and navigation systems that kept the station operational. Everything else was supposed to be handled by the alien species themselves. The problem was that most of the technology had been designed or improved by humans over the decades and, without human understanding, it was breaking down piece by piece. The real breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning when Ambassador Feltaran of the Zelani Consortium stood before the assembly and delivered the announcement that shattered what remained of galactic unity. His crystalline form gleamed under the chamber lights as he spoke in the harmonic tones that his species used for formal declarations. We, the Zelani Consortium, hereby suspend all cooperative agreements with the Galactic Assembly effective immediately, he announced. The chamber fell silent except for the nervous clicking of translator devices. We joined this organization 800 years ago for mutual protection and benefit. What we have witnessed in recent months is neither protective nor beneficial. The Zelani controlled 3 of the most important trade nexuses in the galaxy. Their crystal ships carried goods between hundreds of worlds, and their quantum banking systems handled the financial transactions that kept galactic commerce running. Without the Zelani, the economic foundation of interstellar civilization would crumble. Feltaran continued his speech with words that cut through the chamber like a laser beam. This assembly has become a circus of incompetence without human oversight. Every crisis grows worse under your management. Every problem becomes 10 problems under your solutions. We refuse to remain part of this failing experiment. Panic spread through the assembled delegates like wildfire. The Thrakari representative roared in anger, demanding to know how the Zelani dared abandon their responsibilities. The Yilnari delegate spoke in rapid clicks that translated as desperate pleas for reconsideration. Even the ancient Kef, who rarely showed emotion, began swaying in the way that indicated deep distress. Chancellor Vextar tried to maintain order, but his crystal voice cracked with strain. This is not the time for rash decisions, he pleaded. We must work together to solve our current difficulties. The humans will return when they see that we need them. But Feltaran laughed a sound like breaking glass. The humans offered their partnership, and you treated them like servants. They offered their wisdom, and you ignored their counsel. They offered their friendship, and you took their sacrifices for granted. Why would they return to a galaxy that never appreciated what they gave? The truth of those words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Many of the delegates had spent months convincing themselves that humanity would come back when the current troubles passed. They had believed that humans were too attached to galactic civilization to stay away permanently. Now they were facing the reality that humanity might never return. Minho, who had been monitoring communications from his post in the technical section, sent an urgent message to the few remaining humans on the station. The Zelani withdrawal is triggering a cascade failure. Other species are preparing to follow them out the door. The Hegemony Council is talking about dissolving the assembly entirely. The fear that had been growing quietly in the shadows was now screaming in the light of day. Without the Zelani trade network, dozens of worlds would lose access to essential supplies. The quantum banking system that facilitated trillions of credits in daily transactions would shut down. Entire sectors of the galaxy would be cut off from galactic civilization. Worse yet, the Zelani withdrawal was not just about economics, it was about respect and competence. The consortium had been one of the most loyal supporters of the assembly for centuries. If they were leaving, then the situation was truly hopeless. So Young, who had been working in the Assembly Military Command Center, watched as the peacekeeping fleet received contradictory orders from panicked politicians. Some wanted to blockade Zelani space to prevent their withdrawal. Others wanted to send diplomatic missions to beg for reconsideration. A few extremist voices even suggested using military force to keep the consortium in the assembly. The fleet commanders were paralyzed by the conflicting orders. Without human strategic leadership, they could not decide which course of action made sense. They had become accustomed to receiving clear guidance based on careful analysis of political, military, and economic factors. Now they were getting emotional reactions and desperate schemes from leaders who had no idea what they were doing. Jinnah sent her daily report to the human fleet with hands that shook from exhaustion. "The domino effect is accelerating," she wrote. "The Zilani withdrawal has convinced other species that the assembly is finished. 6 more delegations have announced they are considering suspension of their membership. The trade networks are collapsing, and some worlds are already reporting shortages of essential goods. The infrastructure that humans had helped build over 2 centuries was falling apart in months. The careful balance of interests and relationships that had kept hundreds of species working together was dissolving into chaos and suspicion. Every species was looking out for itself and abandoning the greater good. What made it worse was that the aliens finally understood what they had lost. The Vorthan, who had always prized logic and efficiency, were discovering that human intuition had been essential for making their systems work. The Mellery, who lived in complex underwater societies, realized that human empathy had helped them understand other species. The Ket, who were natural warriors, found that human strategic thinking had made their military forces effective, but understanding their loss did not help them recover what they had thrown away. The skills that humans possessed could not be learned quickly or easily. They required generations of experience and a way of thinking that was uniquely human. The ability to see patterns across different cultures, to find compromises that satisfied conflicting needs, to build trust between suspicious enemies. As the 6th month ended, Tai Yang received orders from the human fleet to prepare for final departure. The last human personnel would be leaving the assembly station within days. Their technical support mission was complete, and there was no reason to stay longer. He looked around the engineering section, where alien workers struggled with equipment they did not fully understand. Warning lights flashed everywhere, systems failed daily, and repairs were becoming impossible without human knowledge. The station that had once been a marvel of galactic cooperation was becoming a monument to what happened when people took essential help for granted. The final message that Tai Yang sent to the human fleet was short but devastating. The galaxy is learning that the peace and prosperity they enjoyed was not a natural state. It was an artificial creation maintained by human effort and sacrifice. Now that the effort has stopped, the artificial structure is collapsing back into the natural state of conflict and chaos. The silence that humanity had left behind was no longer empty. It was filled with the sounds of breaking systems, failing negotiations, and growing desperation. The aliens had thought they were losing helpful servants when the humans left. Now they knew they had lost the invisible foundation that held their entire civilization together, and still their pride prevented them from offering humans the respect and equality that might bring them back. The fear was becoming terror, but the lessons were being learned too slowly and at too high a price. 1 year had passed since humanity vanished from galactic space, and Admiral So Young stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring at the star charts that showed the location of human settlements. The Galactic Assembly had finally collapsed completely. Half the member species had withdrawn entirely, and the other half were fighting each other over the ruins of what had once been a great civilization. So Young had been chosen to lead the first official diplomatic mission to human space since the Exodus. The irony was not lost on her. She was human herself, one of the few who had stayed behind to serve in the assembly military. But now she was representing the same aliens who had driven her people away, and she was tasked with begging them to come back. The mission had taken months to organize. The remaining assembly leaders had argued endlessly about what to offer humanity. Most of them still refused to admit they had made serious mistakes. Instead, they spoke about temporary consultation, agreements, and limited advisory positions. They wanted human help, but they were not willing to give humans the respect and equality they deserved. The journey to human space took 3 weeks through regions that had once been safe and prosperous, under assembly protection. Now every system was fortified and suspicious. Trade ships traveled in armed convoys. Pirates and raiders attacked anyone who looked vulnerable. Worlds that had once welcomed visitors now demanded extensive security checks. Before allowing anyone to approach, So Young passed through the Kepler sector, where the original conflict had started a year ago. The war there had finally ended, but only because all three species had exhausted themselves fighting. Nobody had won, and the once rich mining territories were now empty battlegrounds filled with debris and graves. Further out, they encountered the remnants of Zilani trade stations that had been abandoned when the consortium withdrew from galactic affairs. The beautiful crystal structures floated dark and empty in space, like monuments to what the galaxy had lost when it decided it could survive without cooperation. As they approached the coordinates of the new human colonies, So Young felt her heart beating faster. She had not seen her own people in over a year. The last messages from the human fleet had been polite but distant. They were building new lives in unexplored regions of space, and they seemed to be doing well without the constant burden of solving everyone else's problems. When the human settlements finally appeared on the viewing screens, So Young gasped in surprise. She had expected to see small, struggling colonies populated by refugees who had fled galactic civilization. Instead, she saw thriving worlds with advanced cities, beautiful architecture, and defensive systems that were more sophisticated than anything the Assembly had ever built. The human ships that came out to meet them were sleek and powerful with technology that So Young did not recognize. The hulls gleamed with materials she had never seen before, and their energy signatures showed power levels that should have been impossible. The humans had not just survived their departure from galactic space, they had evolved. President Seok Jin of the Human Colonial Authority met the Assembly delegation in a conference room that overlooked one of the new human cities through massive transparent walls. So Young could see parks and gardens mixed with gleaming towers and transport systems that moved silently through the air. It was more beautiful than anything she remembered from the old human worlds. Seok Jin was polite but cold as he listened to the Assembly offer. The aliens were willing to restore human membership in the galactic community. They promised better representation in the Assembly Council, increased territorial rights, and improved trade agreements. They spoke as if they were offering generous gifts rather than trying to repair the damage they had caused. When they finished their presentation, Seok Jin sat quietly for a long moment, looking out at the human city below. Then he turned back to the delegation and asked a simple question that cut through all their careful diplomatic language. "What can you offer us that we do not already have?" he said. The Assembly representatives looked at each other in confusion. They had expected the humans to be grateful for the chance to return to galactic civilization. They had assumed that isolation would have made humanity weak and desperate. Instead, they were facing people who seemed more prosperous and advanced than ever. Chancellor Vex Tar, who had insisted on leading the delegation, despite his species' failure to understand human psychology, tried to explain the benefits of rejoining the galactic community. He spoke about trade opportunities, scientific cooperation, and mutual defense agreements, but Seok Jin listened with an expression that showed he was not impressed. "Your trade is thriving," he said. "We have discovered new worlds rich in resources we never knew existed. Our science has advanced faster in 1 year of freedom than it did in decades of serving others. And as for defense, our ships and weapons are now superior to anything the Assembly ever built." The truth was obvious to everyone in the room. Humanity had been held back by their service to the galactic community. While they spent their time and energy solving other people's problems, they had neglected their own development. Now that they were free to focus on themselves, they had achieved remarkable progress in just 1 year. Ambassador Fel Taran of the Zilani Consortium, who had joined the mission, despite his people's withdrawal from the Assembly, tried a different approach. He spoke about the moral obligation that advanced species had to help those less fortunate. He suggested that humanity had a duty to return and restore order to the galaxy. Seok Jin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We served that duty for 2 centuries, he replied. "We gave everything we had to build something greater than ourselves. We prevented countless wars, solved impossible problems, and sacrificed our own advancement for the good of others. What did we receive in return?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The Assembly delegates knew the answer. Humanity had received criticism when things went wrong and silence when things went right. They had been treated like useful servants rather than equal partners. Their contributions had been taken for granted, and their sacrifices had been ignored. So Young felt ashamed to be wearing an assembly uniform as she watched the negotiation unfold. She knew that her own people had tried to warn the aliens about the consequences of taking human help for granted, but the warnings had been dismissed as emotional manipulation or political maneuvering. The meeting continued for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The assembly had nothing to offer that humanity wanted or needed. The aliens were still thinking in terms of power and territory, while the humans had moved beyond such concerns. They had found something more valuable than galactic influence. They had found peace and self-respect. When the delegation prepared to leave Seokjin, offered them one final statement that would be remembered long after the Galactic Assembly was forgotten. "We bear no ill will toward any species," he said, "but we no longer serve others at the expense of ourselves. The galaxy must find its own solutions to its own problems. We wish you well, but we will not return to clean up the mess you have made." The journey back to assembly space took 3 weeks, but it felt like 3 years. So Young had to carry the news that humanity would not be coming back to save galactic civilization. The aliens would have to learn to solve their own problems or watch their worlds burn in the chaos they had created. As her ship approached the ruins of the assembly station, Young sent her final report to the remaining galactic leaders. The message was brief but devastating. "Humanity has moved beyond us," she wrote. "They are no longer the species that left galactic space a year ago. They have become something greater. Something. We can no longer reach the door we closed behind them has locked, and we do not have the key." The silence that followed humanity's departure had taught the galaxy many hard lessons, but the most painful lesson was still to come. The realization that some mistakes cannot be undone and some opportunities when lost are gone forever. The desperate search for humanity had ended in failure, and the galaxy would have to face its future alone. 5 years had passed since humanity left galactic space, and Captain Yoon-ji stood on the observation deck of her exploration vessel, watching a new star system unfold before them. The human fleet had traveled far beyond the borders of what had once been assembly territory, discovering worlds that sparkled like jewels in the endless darkness of space. Behind them lay the ruins of galactic civilization. The Galactic Assembly had officially dissolved 3 years ago, ending a 1,000-year experiment in interstellar cooperation. The Great Alliance that had once united hundreds of species across the galaxy had crumbled not through war, but through the simple inability to function without the humans who had held it together. Yoon-ji was part of a new generation of humans who had been born after the Exodus. Her crew included young people who knew the old galactic civilization only as history lessons. They were explorers and builders, not servants and mediators. They looked forward to discovering new worlds rather than backward to solving old problems. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency as they approached the 4th planet in the system. Their sensors showed a world rich in minerals with vast oceans and continents, covered in forests. It would make an excellent site for a new human colony, far from the chaos that still consumed the inner regions of the galaxy. Lieutenant Hai-1 called out from the navigation station. "Captain, we are receiving a communication request from an unknown vessel." "The signal is coming from the edge of the system," Yoon-ji frowned. New contacts were always handled carefully in the post-assembly galaxy. Many species had turned to piracy or raiding when their civilizations collapsed. Others had become suspicious and hostile toward any outsiders. The humans had learned to be cautious in their dealings with alien species. "Put it through," she ordered. The main screen flickered and showed the bridge of a ship that Yoon-ji recognized as Malari design. The aquatic beings had been one of the more reasonable species in the old assembly, but their underwater cities had suffered badly when human-designed filtration systems failed. The Malari captain spoke through his translation, his words bubbling with the sound of water. "Captain, we respectfully request permission to approach your vessel. We wish to discuss the possibility of establishing trade relations between our peoples." Yoon-ji studied the alien carefully. The Malari looked tired and worn down by years of struggle. His ship showed signs of poor maintenance and his crew appeared to be operating with minimal resources. She could guess what this was about. Another former assembly species hoping to establish some kind of relationship with the thriving human colonies. Permission granted, she replied. But maintain distance and keep your weapons powered down. We will meet in neutral space. An hour later, Yunji sat across from the Mallory captain in the conference room of her ship. The alien had brought only a small diplomatic team, and they carried gifts of rare pearls and artwork from their underwater worlds. It was a gesture that showed both respect and desperation. Captain Golreef explained his people's situation in careful diplomatic language. The Malari homeworld was struggling without the technology and resources they had relied on during the assembly years. Their population was declining, and their once beautiful cities were falling into decay. Do not come as beggars, Golreef said with as much dignity as he could manage. We offer fair trade partnerships based on mutual benefit. Our people have skills in underwater construction and aquatic farming that might be valuable to your colonies, Ini. G listened politely, but she had heard similar requests dozens of times over the past few years. Former assembly species regularly approached human colonies seeking trade deals, defense agreements, or technical assistance. They all offered what they could, but they all needed more than they could give. The negotiations lasted 3 hours and ended with a limited trade agreement. The humans would provide certain manufactured goods and medical supplies in exchange for Malari artwork and specialized aquatic technologies. It was a fair deal, but it was also a reminder of how the galaxy had changed. After the Malari delegation left, Yunji walked through her ship thinking about the conversation. The aliens were learning to treat humans as equals now, but it had taken the collapse of their entire civilization to teach them that lesson. It was a high price to pay for such a simple understanding. Communications officer Min Jae found her in the ship's garden, where earth plants grew under artificial sunlight. Captain, we have received another message from the Colonial Authority. They want us to attend a diplomatic conference on New Seoul next month. Yunji nodded. New Seoul was the capital world of the human colonial government and conferences. They're usually dealt with important policy decisions. The humans had been receiving more and more requests for formal diplomatic relations as the former assembly species adapted to their new reality. The conference turned out to be exactly what Yunji expected. Representatives from dozens of human colonies gathered to discuss how to handle the increasing contact with alien species. Some delegates wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations and mutual defense treaties. Others preferred to maintain the independence that had served humanity so well. President Seok Jin, who had led humanity through the transition from galactic servants to independent people, addressed the assembly with words that captured the mood of the new human civilization. We have learned the value of our own worth, he said. We no longer measure our success by how much we can give to others, but by how much we can achieve for ourselves. This does not mean we are selfish or cruel. It means we understand that helping others must not come at the cost of destroying ourselves. The policy that emerged from the conference was balanced and practical. Humanity would engage in trade and limited cooperation with alien species, but always as equals, and always with clear boundaries. There would be no more endless sacrifices for the greater good, no more taking responsibility for other people's problems, no more giving everything and receiving nothing in return. Back on her ship, Yunji received reports from across human space. The colonies were thriving in ways that would have been impossible during the assembly years. New technologies were being developed at an incredible pace. New worlds were being settled with advanced cities that surpassed anything from the old galactic civilization. The humans had also made contact with several species that had never been part of the assembly. These aliens lived in distant regions of the galaxy, and they approached humanity with genuine respect and curiosity. They wanted to learn from human achievements, but they did not expect humans to solve their problems for them. On Earth itself, which had become the symbolic heart of human independence. Former assembly members often came to visit. They walked through museums that displayed artifacts from the galactic civilization and read historical accounts of humanity's service to the greater galactic community. Ki-ho, who had been the last human ambassador to the Assembly, now worked as a professor at the University of New Geneva. His students were young humans who had grown up free from the burden of serving ungrateful aliens. They often asked him why humanity had spent so long helping people who did not appreciate their sacrifices. His answer was always the same: we had to learn our own worth, he would tell them. Sometimes you discover your true value only after you stop giving it away for free. The galaxy taught us that lesson in the hardest way possible, but it was a lesson we needed to learn. The silence that had followed humanity's departure had indeed been deafening, but not because it was loud. The silence had been deafening because it revealed how much noise humanity had been preventing. For 2 centuries, human mediation had covered up the natural conflicts and incompatibilities between alien species. When the humans left, the galaxy discovered its authentic voice, and that voice was often angry, confused, and divided. But it was also honest in a way that the old artificial harmony had never been. The species that survived the collapse learned to solve their own problems and take responsibility for their own futures. The fear that had followed humanity's exit had transformed into acceptance of a new reality. Cooperation now required mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The galaxy was smaller and less connected, but it was also more genuine in its relationships. Yunji stood again at her observation deck, watching the stars and thinking about the future. Humanity was no longer the galaxy's servant, mediator, or savior. They were simply themselves, building their own civilization, exploring new worlds and creating their own destiny. And that, she realized, was more than enough. The humans had found their voice in the silence, and it was a voice that spoke of independence, dignity, and the right to determine their own fate. The galaxy had learned to speak for itself, and though the conversation was often difficult, it was at least honest in the end. Both humanity and the galaxy had discovered who they really were when the artificial bonds of dependency were finally broken. The lesson had been written in the collapse of civilizations and the birth of new ones, but it was a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Kaiho stood alone on the giant viewing deck of the Galactic Assembly Station, watching the last human ships disappear into the dark space beyond. The blue dot that was Earth grew smaller and smaller until it was just another star in the endless black void. He had been the human ambassador for 12 years, and now he was watching his entire species leave the galaxy forever. The evacuation had taken 3 months, but it felt like 3 lifetimes. Every day, fewer humans walked the corridors of the massive space station. Every day, the aliens seemed more confused and worried. They kept asking Keiho when the humans would change their minds and come back. They could not believe that humanity was really leaving Young Mi, his assistant, for the past 5 years, approached him with a stack of data tablets in her hands. She was one of only 15 humans left on the station. Her job was to help transfer all human records and projects to the alien species who would try to continue the work. The look on her face told Keiho everything he needed to know about how that was going. "The aliens don't understand any of it," she said quietly. "They keep asking for instruction manuals and step-by-step guides, but they don't realize that most of what we did required thinking in ways they simply cannot think." Keiho nodded and took the tablets from her. The weight of them seemed heavier than usual. Each tablet contained years of human work, solutions to problems that had taken months to solve, treaties that had prevented wars, technological advances that had improved life for billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. All of it was being handed over to species who had never appreciated how much effort it took. 3 days ago, the Vorthan delegation had actually laughed when they heard humans were leaving. The tall blue-skinned beings with their crystal-like armor thought it was some kind of negotiation tactic. They believed humans were trying to get better trade deals or more territory in the assembly. They could not imagine that humans would actually abandon their responsibilities. The Malari had been even worse. The aquatic creatures in their water-filled environment suits had suggested that humans were having some kind of emotional breakdown. They offered to send their best mind healers to help humanity get over whatever psychological crisis was causing this strange behavior. They truly believed that leaving the assembly was a form of mental illness. Even the ancient Kef, who had been part of the galactic community for over 2,000 years, thought the human departure was temporary, The wise old beings with their tentacles and ancient knowledge had seen many species come and go, but they assumed humans were too valuable to actually leave. They kept sending messages to the human fleet asking when they would return from their little vacation. Ki-ho remembered the final meeting of the Human Council 3 weeks ago. Fleet Admiral Hyun-woo had stood before the assembled human leaders from across the galaxy. His words had been simple and clear. We came here to help build something better. Instead, we became the servants who fix every problem while getting no respect or thanks in return. It's time to see if they can manage without us. The decision had not been made in anger. There had been no great fight or terrible insult that drove humanity away. Instead, it had been a slow realization that grew over decades. Humans gave everything to the galactic community. They solved impossible problems. They prevented wars. They invented new technologies. They mediated disputes between species who could not even understand each other. And in return, they got treated like helpful servants who could be ignored when not needed. Young-mi pointed to one of the viewing screens that showed the assembly main chamber. Delegates from hundreds of worlds were gathered there arguing about the human departure, but they were not discussing how to bring humans back. Instead, they were fighting over who would take control of human territories and resources. Look at them, she said with sadness in her voice. They still think this is about power and politics. They don't understand that we left because we were tired of being taken for granted. The Thrakari delegation was demanding immediate access to human research facilities. The insect-like beings wanted the advanced medical technology that humans had developed. The Yilnari were claiming that human colonies should be redistributed among loyal assembly members. The plant-based creatures believed that humans had been hoarding the best worlds. Meanwhile, the Zilani Consortium was already making plans to take over human trade routes. The crystalline beings who controlled much of the galaxy's commerce saw this as an opportunity to expand their influence. They were treating the human departure like a business transaction. Ki-ho walked to another viewing port that showed the massive construction yards where human engineers had been building new ships for the assembly fleet. The work had stopped 3 days ago when the last human technicians left. Now alien workers stood around the half-finished vessels with no idea how to continue the complex construction process. The humans had not sabotaged anything. They had not destroyed their work or taken critical information with them. They had simply handed over everything and left. But without human knowledge and intuition, none of the alien species could figure out how to continue the project's Dal-Su. One of the human communications officers came running up to Ki-ho with an urgent message tablet. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "the Assembly Council is demanding that you attend an emergency session. They want to know our exact departure timeline, and they want guarantees that human advisors will remain available for consultation." Ki-ho took the tablet and read the message. The assembly leaders still believed they could negotiate some kind of compromise. They were offering humans better representation in the council, more territorial rights, and increased trade benefits. They thought the departure was just a bargaining strategy. "Tell them I will attend the session," Ki-ho said, "but make it clear that I am there only to finalize the transition. I am not there to negotiate our return." As Dal-Su hurried away, Ki-ho turned back to the viewing port. The human fleet was now just tiny dots of light moving away from the galactic core. Soon they would reach the jump points that would take them beyond assembly space to the new worlds they had found in the outer rim regions of the galaxy. Those worlds were rich and beautiful with resources that could support human civilization for thousands of years. More importantly, they were far enough away that aliens could not simply show up and demand human help. Whenever they had problems, humanity would finally have the chance to build something for themselves instead of always building for others. Young Mai joined Ki-ho at the viewing port. "Are you worried about what will happen to them?" she asked, nodding toward the assembly chamber where the alien delegates were still arguing. Ki-ho considered the question carefully. He thought about the hundreds of species that made up the galactic community. Some of them were genuinely good people who had treated humans with respect and kindness, but many others had seen humans as nothing more than useful tools to be used when convenient and ignored when not needed. "They will learn," Ki-ho said finally. "They will have to learn how to solve their own problems and work together without someone else doing the hard work for them. It might be difficult at first, but maybe it will make them stronger." The truth was that Kehoe did worry about what would happen. He knew that without human mediation, many of the old conflicts between species would flare up again. He knew that complex projects would fail without human innovation. He knew that the carefully balanced system of trade and diplomacy that held the galaxy together might collapse. But he also knew that humans had given enough. They had spent 2 centuries putting everyone else's needs first. It was time to focus on their own future and let others take responsibility for theirs. The last human transport ship had just cleared the station. Kehoe and his small team were the only humans left, and they would leave tomorrow on a special diplomatic vessel. Their mission was complete. Their service to the galactic community was over. As Kehoe watched the stars, he wondered if the aliens would ever understand what they had lost. Not just human skills and knowledge, but human dedication and sacrifice. He wondered if they would realize that the quiet departure of humanity marked the end of an era when one species had held the galaxy together through pure willingness to help others. The silence that followed would teach them more than any words ever could.